For antiwar.com and Chaos Radio 95.9 in Austin, Texas, I'm Scott Horton. This is Anti-War Radio. And I'm happy to welcome back to the show Brendan ONeill. He's the editor of Spiked. That's spiked-online.com. And he's the author of Can I Recycle My Granny? And 30 Other Eco Dilemmas. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for joining us on the show today. And, I want to talk with you all about the Chilcot Committee and all this kind of review of how Britain got into the Iraq War that's going on over there. It's most notable to me just for the fact that nothing like it is happening over here, except, maybe on this show and a couple other places. But I'm not, unlike the rest of American media, I'm not over Iraq yet. I still want to talk about it. So, hopefully we can cover some of that. But I wanted to start off asking you about this article you wrote about Voltaire and how, American and British society, I guess you're focusing on your own there, your own society over there in England, but you're talking about these guys being prosecuted for free speech and how these Islamist crazies who hate the Enlightenment have really been able to co-opt it because the rest of us have abandoned it.
Yes.
This is pretty interesting stuff here. Tell us the story.
7 Islamists were put on trial last year for taking part in a kind of angry demonstration against British troops where they shouted at the soldiers, calling them baby killers and murderers and everything else. And they were put on trial for basically inciting hatred and causing a public disturbance. And it was a really interesting trial because the lawyers representing the 7 Islamic protesters quoted Voltaire and said, they quoted Voltaire's views on free speech, which is summed up as, I disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And I thought it was really interesting that these Islamists, who, as you say, have a kind of instinctive suspicion of the Enlightenment and of Western tradition and Western democracy, would be able to cite Voltaire in this fashion. And I think it really demonstrates how much Voltaire has been abandoned by the mainstream in British society and in Western society more broadly, when he can be kind of co-opted in this way. And I think what the Islamists were effectively saying was they were effectively daring British society to override Voltaire. It was a very clever move because they were saying, look, if you find us guilty, if you denigrate our free speech, you are writing off 300 or 400 years of Enlightenment traditions. You are denigrating Voltaire himself. So it was a very clever thing for them to do, to hold up this great Enlightenment thinker. And then the trial came to its conclusion at the beginning of this year, and they were found guilty of causing a disturbance, of going too far, of using disturbing language, and they were fined and given suspended sentences. So they were right. British society has abandoned free speech, and it was a pretty shocking state of affairs.
Yeah, well, it's funny, too, because you point out in here that one of them had a sign outside of the trial. I forgot the exact quote, but something to the effect of freedom is a joke. Look to Islam, that kind of thing. And it seems like this is what always happens, right? The best of us, or the best of our principles end up taking the blame. Yeah. So if there's any amount of freedom in the marketplace, well, that's obviously to blame for whatever is wrong with the economy. It could never be the fact that we've completely abandoned the ideas of free market capitalism, if we ever had them, here in the Virginia Company, otherwise known as the United States. But it's always the freedom's fault, right? And so here in this case, the people of England, like the people of America, have turned freedom into a joke. And so, the Bin Laden lover outside actually can get away with it. He's got a good point.
Yeah, I think I would say that it's the government of Britain primarily that has turned freedom into a joke. But, it's kind of overridden our right to free speech. It's imposed lots of petty new rules and regulations about how we can behave and where we can smoke and where we can drink and everything else. And it's denigrated some really important traditional civil liberties like habeas corpus, the idea that someone should never be imprisoned until he's been found guilty of a crime. All these things have just been written off over the past 10 years, both before 9/11 and also after it. And I think what these Islamists were effectively saying outside the court was, they had a placard saying, as you say, freedom is a joke, turn to Islam instead. And, lots of people in the West, lots of kind of pro-war activists and pro-war commentators will often say that these foreign Islamic people, these crazy Islamists are destroying our traditional freedoms. But what I think this case really showed is that it's our own societies that are rubbishing these traditional freedoms. It's our own governments that are undermining them. And the role of the Islamists, if they have one, is basically just to laugh at that process and to point it out to us and to say, look, you have no freedoms, it means nothing. So I think it's really inaccurate for the kind of warmongers and the scaremongers to say that these Islamists are destroying our way of life, because what's very clear is that we ourselves are destroying it, and the Islamists are just reacting to that fact.
Mm-hmm. Well, here in America, we have a lot more kind of religious conservatism and more, fundamentalist, every word is literal truth kind of thing. I guess you guys kicked all the Puritans out and they all came here. So we have a much more conservative society in that sense than you guys. But there are a lot of people on both sides of the Atlantic here that really, you would think, are basically the products of the Enlightenment, right? We call it liberalism, just generally speaking. There are lots of people who value science and education and good arguments and whatever, but you kind of attack liberalism in this article as sort of reactionary Enlightenment thinking, where they've really kind of abandoned Voltaire and exchanged him for what? I'm not sure.
Yes, I think that as well as the kind of mainstream governmental attack on Enlightenment values, there has also been a denigration of the Enlightenment by its defenders, which is kind of ironic. Some of the people who claim to be defending the Enlightenment are actually kind of ossifying it, because they're turning it into a list of ideas that you have to adhere to and a list of outlooks that you have to accept. And ironically, they're turning it into a religion. So these are the kind of people who will scaremonger about Al-Qaeda as the greatest threat to civilization, and they will say, we're defending the Enlightenment and Al-Qaeda is trying to destroy it. Or they will say that anyone who questions scientific truth or scientific reality in relation to global warming or anything else is a sinner and a denier and a heretic. And, it was never the tradition of the Enlightenment to treat its doubters and its critics as heretics. In fact, the Enlightenment sprung from it was the precise opposite of that. It was the opposite of the Inquisition, which was all about denouncing people as heretics and deniers, and the Enlightenment was supposed to be something new. So I think in those various ways, both in the way in which these Western liberals obsess with Al-Qaeda and present Al-Qaeda as the greatest threat to the Enlightenment, and also the way in which they turn the Enlightenment into a list of scientific truths that you must accept, I think in the process they are unwittingly denigrating the Enlightenment as well. So I think we need to be careful about both the mainstream governmental attacks, but also the defense of the Enlightenment, which actually harms it.
Mm-hmm. Well, basically what you're saying is the liberals have become conservatives. They've adopted the conservative means of using state power to keep things the way they are, that at least as much of what's good about the way things are that they think they can.
Yeah, well, the problem with British liberals and the British left is that they've often relied on the state to do their work for them. So that they basically see the state as the real agent of change and the real agent of social control and social management. So they look to the state as the solution to social problems, whereas I think a libertarian, and I consider myself a left-wing libertarian, would not look to the state as the solution to all of society's problems, but would rather look to ordinary people, to social solidarities, to local communities, whatever you want to call it. So, yeah, I think liberals and left-wingers have become too reliant on the state to resolve problems, and that gives rise to new forms of control, new forms of censorship, but it tends to be done in very PC language. So, for example, the new Labour government here, cheered on by some left-wing activists, introduced the Religious Hatred Bill in Britain, which basically makes it a potential crime to criticise or mock or laugh at other people's religious beliefs. And it's presented in a very politically correct way to protect ethnic minorities and to protect Muslims in particular and other forms of religion. But it's old-fashioned censorship where basically our thoughts and our speech is being controlled in the name of protecting a minority. So the problem in Britain is not that we have religious fundamentalists or Christian fundamentalists or a right-wing religious movement or anything like that, but we do have increasingly, and especially under New Labour, we have new, left-wingers and liberals who are pushing through new forms of PC control, really.
Well, you know, we should get back to the original story here, which is kind of blowing my mind, honestly. You know, the First Amendment in the United States, which presumes to protect people's natural right to free speech, has been decided by the courts to stop at a compelling state interest or a clear and present danger, like yelling fire in a crowded theater, which is kind of a silly argument anyway, but that's the line as it's been drawn by the courts here. But this court, according to your article here, said that this protest, where these guys were convicted,